I trusted my nephew, or at least I thought I did. He'd always been like a son to me, and I loved him deeply. We were very close, and he was often at my house, spending weekends with me and my partner. We had a strong bond, one built on years of shared memories. I trusted him, and I assumed that my home, my safe space, was never a place where I needed to worry. One evening, after a long day at work, I came home early. My partner wasn't there, and my nephew was supposed to be hanging out in his room. I decided to surprise him with his favorite snack, and as I entered the house, I heard some strange noises coming from the bedroom. I thought it was odd, but brushed it off, assuming maybe it was just the TV or something else. But when I opened the door, what I saw was like a punch to the gut. There, in my own bed, was my nephew, but he wasn't alone. He was with my partner. The room stood still for what felt like an eternity, and I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I didn't even know how to react. I thought I knew both of them, my partner, my nephew. I had no idea their secret affair had been going on for months. There was no mistaking it. The look in their eyes told the story. They had betrayed me in the worst way possible. The aftermath was a blur of emotions. There was so much hurt, confusion, and disbelief. How could they? Why didn't I see the signs? I never imagined that someone so close to me could betray my trust so deeply. It was devastating. It wasn't just about the physical act, it was the emotional betrayal. How could they hide something so significant from me, knowing how much I loved and trusted both of them? The guilt I felt, the feelings of being an outsider in my own home, were unbearable. I had always trusted my nephew, had thought of him as family, but now he was someone else, someone I couldn't understand. I trusted my nephew, or at least I thought I did. For years he had been more than just a family member to me, he was like a son. I had watched him grow from a young boy into a young adult, and I was always there for him when he needed advice, guidance, or just someone to talk to. I had opened my heart and home to him, and I never once questioned his loyalty or integrity. He had spent countless weekends with me, especially during difficult times in his life. After all, his parents lived far away, and I knew that he often found comfort in our home, where he could escape the chaos of his everyday life. But that night, everything I thought I knew about him was turned upside down. I had just come home from work earlier than expected. It was a rare occurrence, as I typically stayed at the office late. My partner wasn't home yet either. I figured I'd make some tea and unwind, and I wanted to surprise my nephew with his favorite snack, chocolate chip cookies. I had just taken them out of the oven when I heard strange noises coming from my bedroom. At first, I thought it was just the house creaking or maybe the TV from my nephew's room. But as I walked closer to the bedroom, I noticed the sounds were more rhythmic, almost like voices. Confused, I slowly approached the door, still carrying the warm cookies in my hands. My mind raced, trying to piece together what I was hearing. Was he on the phone? Could it be his friends? But as I slowly pushed the door open, my world collapsed. There, lying in my bed, was my nephew, his face flushed, and his breathing shallow, locked in an intimate embrace with my partner. They looked up in shock, their eyes wide in horror as they realized they had been caught. The look they exchanged in that moment, a mixture of guilt, panic, and shame, made my heart shatter. I could barely comprehend what I was seeing. The silence that followed was suffocating. I stood there, frozen, unable to find my voice. How long had this been going on? Why hadn't I noticed anything? Questions rushed through my mind, but they felt like distant thoughts, irrelevant against the overwhelming hurt I felt in that moment. I didn't scream. I didn't cry right away. Instead, I stood there, trying to process the betrayal before me. It was as though time had stopped, and I was caught in some sort of cruel limbo. I had no idea how to react. Was I supposed to shout? To demand answers? Or was I supposed to quietly walk away, pretending that what I had just witnessed wasn't real? But it was real, and the realization was unbearable. Eventually, I found my voice, but it came out as a whisper. "How long?" I asked, my voice shaking with disbelief. My nephew, still in shock, stammered out an apology, but his words were meaningless. They offered no comfort. It was like listening to someone trying to fix a broken vase with a few weak words, hoping it would somehow make the shards disappear. My partner, on the other hand, didn't say a word. The silence between us was deafening. I stared at them, unable to fully process the scene before me. This was my home, my space, a place I had always felt safe and secure. And yet, here they were, two people I loved and trusted, shattering that security in the most painful way imaginable. I felt something shift inside me, something deep and primal. The pain quickly transformed into a storm of anger and confusion. How could this happen? How could I have been so blind? I had always prided myself on being the kind of person who could sense dishonesty, the one who saw through the facade. Yet here I was, betrayed in the worst possible way. As I stormed out of the room, I felt my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure what I wanted more at that moment, to yell and curse at them, or to simply walk out of the house and never return. I wanted answers, but at the same time, I knew there was no answer that could make this situation okay. The foundation of everything I thought I knew had cracked, and there was no fixing it. I spent the rest of the night pacing, trying to collect my thoughts. I knew that confronting my nephew and partner right away wouldn't help. I needed space to think, to process the flood of emotions that were threatening to overwhelm me. The next morning, when they both approached me, their faces full of regret and guilt, I didn't know what to say. I wanted to scream at them, tell them how they had destroyed me, but I couldn't find the words. Instead, I asked a question that seemed almost too simple to ask: why? It was my nephew who answered first, his voice trembling. "I don't know," he said, his eyes brimming with tears. "It just happened. I never meant to hurt you." His words felt hollow, like an excuse rather than an explanation. My partner, on the other hand, seemed unable to look me in the eye. He muttered something about being confused, about not knowing where things went wrong in our relationship. But that didn't matter to me anymore. His confession did nothing to ease the pain or mend the broken trust. The emotional devastation was too deep. In the days that followed, I found myself in a whirlwind of emotions. There was anger, yes, but there was also sorrow, confusion, and a sense of profound loss. I was heartbroken, not just because of the betrayal, but because of the way I had been made to feel insignificant in my own life. The love I had for my nephew and partner was still there, but it had been tainted by their lies and actions. The most difficult part of the whole experience was reconciling my emotions. How could I possibly forgive them? How could I look at either of them the same way again? Every time I saw my nephew, I couldn't help but remember that night, that awful betrayal. And with my partner, the distance between us seemed to grow wider and wider. The connection we once shared felt irreparably broken. Eventually, I had to make a choice whether to continue to fight for this family, to try and rebuild what had been lost, or whether it was time to walk away. The idea of walking away from everything I had known for years felt unbearable, but I realized that staying in a relationship built on deception would only continue to hurt me. Trust, once broken, is not easily repaired, and I had to acknowledge that the emotional toll of living with constant reminders of the betrayal was too much. In the end, I chose to leave. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't something I did lightly, but I knew that for my own emotional health, I had to distance myself from the people who had hurt me the most. The pain of losing them was overwhelming, but so was the pain of living in a fractured relationship. I eventually found peace, though it came slowly. I learned that trust is fragile and that betrayal can come from the most unexpected places. But more importantly, I learned that I deserve to be loved and respected, not just by those I choose to keep close, but also by myself. The weeks following my decision to leave were filled with confusion and self-doubt. At first, I questioned whether I had made the right choice. I still loved my nephew, despite what he had done, and the thought of severing ties with him was painful. He had been such a big part of my life for so long that it felt like I was losing a part of myself. And my partner, well, he was the person I had shared so many years of my life with. The emotional connection we once had felt irretrievable, but I couldn't shake the memories of our shared moments, the years we spent building a life together. Could this betrayal be forgiven? Could things ever go back to the way they were? But with every passing day, the truth became clearer. The betrayal wasn't just a mistake, it was a deliberate act, one that had shattered the foundation of my trust in both of them. My nephew's apology, while genuine in his eyes, was still insufficient. His actions spoke louder than any words could. He had crossed a boundary that could never be uncrossed, and in doing so, he had severed the special bond we once shared. I remember the day I finally spoke to my nephew alone, after all the dust had settled. He was sitting in the living room, his eyes swollen from crying. His body language was vulnerable, a far cry from the confident young man I had known. He looked up at me, clearly hoping for some kind of forgiveness, but I couldn't give it to him, not yet, maybe not ever. "I don't know how you could do this," I said softly, my voice trembling with pain. "You knew how much I loved you, how much I trusted you. How could you do this to me?" He opened his mouth to speak, but the words never came. He had no defense, no justification. There was nothing he could say that would make what had happened right. He simply stared at the ground, unable to meet my eyes. And that was it, the final sign for me. The silence that filled the room was more telling than anything else. In that moment, I realized that nothing would ever be the same. He was no longer the young man I had once trusted. And my partner? He was a stranger now, someone I could no longer share my life with. The days after this conversation were filled with a sense of numbness. I packed up my things, moved into a smaller apartment, and tried to reestablish some sense of normalcy. The emotional pain I felt was unbearable, but I also began to feel a small sense of relief. I no longer had to pretend everything was okay. I no longer had to force a smile or ignore the emotional scars that they had left on me. I went to therapy to help process the trauma. My therapist helped me understand that the betrayal wasn't my fault, that my nephew's and partner's actions were a reflection of their own choices, not my shortcomings. Slowly, I learned to give myself permission to feel anger, sadness, and even grief over the loss of the relationship. It took long months before I could even think of forgiving them. But forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean that I had to let them back into my life. It simply meant accepting that what had happened was beyond my control and that I deserved better than living in the shadows of their deceit. Eventually, I came to a painful but liberating realization. The people we love can hurt us in ways we never expect. And while it's incredibly difficult to move past the pain, we can't allow the betrayal to define us. I chose to let go of the relationship, not out of bitterness, but because I recognize that healing comes when we release the weight of those who no longer deserve a place in our lives. Though I still loved my nephew, and part of me would always carry the grief of what had transpired, I learned to trust myself again. I rebuilt my life with new boundaries, new values, and a deeper understanding of what it meant to love and be loved. I don't know what the future holds for my relationship with my nephew or my partner. Perhaps one day, if they truly change, we could rebuild what was lost. But for now, I focus on me, on healing, on moving forward. Because I deserve a life where trust is not just given, it is earned.